Hey, Mayor. I've got to find. Hi, Ben.
How we doing?
We are recording this morning. And I've already had requests for people who are traveling and don't want to miss today's presentation.
Good. You guys getting snow up there?
It's very light. It's enough that it covered cars, and I saw one of our snow attendants out brushing off people's cars this morning and in the sidewalk. It was enough to make things. I don't know, did my sound, can you hear me?
Yep.
Here we,
Yep.
okay. Switching over, there we go. I can hear you, so that means you should be able to hear me. Kent's in the other office with the kids call right now. And it just, if we do that over our speakers, they eventually start to bleed in and we get feedback. So we're going to wait just a few minutes here because I know that there were some folks in worship who were planning on being here. So I'm going to wait till we see them pop in. Hello, Don Spikeman. Looks like you're switching computers.
We're having difficulties, but we're up at the lake, so we don't have great connection up here.
Oh, okay.
Just lost you.
We didn't lose you. If you can hear me, I'm looking at you. I'm hearing you.
Well, I'm seeing me, but not you.
Well, okay. Hi, Scott.
Well, I can't.
So your video I can see on the one, and your audio seems to be coming through your other connection. I'm speaking to Don because I can see the dog.
I don't know if you can. Oh. No, I got the camera on backwards, I think.
There we go. Now I see you.
Keep it on you, not me.
I can't see anybody
Morning,
else.
Rhonda.
I can see myself,
Morning.
which isn't all that great.
Yeah, just let it roll and don't worry about it.
I don't know if he's at his computer right now, but Jesse shared that there's been good progress with his mom and dad in terms of their COVID recovery. But their quarantine got extended because the car they rode back in with their nephew, he ended up testing positive, even though no one else did. So thus, one more week of not in-person youth group tonight. There he is.
Hey, everybody.
How's your nephew?
He's good. I think he's just about rounded the corner. Yeah.
And your parents continue to make progress?
My mom had a little bit of a scare, like, what was it? A couple days ago. She actually ended up in the ER as well, with similar post-COVID symptoms. I don't think it was exactly, but some really bad chest pains, and her her lungs were really struggling, just with fluid, and so the doctors were glad that they made the trip to the ER because she was on the brink of either getting much better or much worse. So yeah, but she's doing a lot better.
Has anybody else realized that, like, if you do Altoids when you're wearing your mask, you don't see your coffee breath? I never realized how bad my own coffee breath was, and let me tell you, I learned. All right, so there's two of our worshipers that I was expecting. Hey, so Stephen and Rachel, after this morning's sermon, any thoughts about changing plans, or are you guys still good?
We're calling it off. We're just friends now.
So Ben, you don't have the resource to understand that. Kent was preaching from the text from 1 Corinthians about not 1 Corinthians.
It was 1 Corinthians 7.
Yeah, 1 Corinthians 7 about if you're not married, don't get married, stay single, and it was just one of those things where it was just like one of those yeah.
What is that message thing?
Does anybody know? Is that you, Ben, trying to broadcast?
Oh, no, it's not. I'm looking at Lynn's screen there.
That's okay.
All's well now, though.
Yep, all's well now. Okay. Dave's there. All right. I'm just waiting for one other person. Although after I said that we were recording it, I don't know if that meant that they were going to watch it later. It's 10:47. We're going to start and they can catch up. So we're here for week 2. Ben Connor is our speaker today. I think everybody that's here today was on last week. So Ben, just take it away.
All right. Well, hopefully we build on what we did last week. I am going to share my screen. So let me do that.
No, the video keeps coming and going.
My friend Vicky's still here. It looks like we lost the trailer there.
I think we just lost you.
We're to a shared screen here, so that doesn't mean that if your screen went black for a minute, it's okay.
There you go.
I have the text going in the bottom too. Everybody can see that.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'll just start this picture.
Let me ask everybody to mute themselves. Okay. If you're on, mute yourself. Yeah, Lynn, you're not muted yet.
Usually I'm
Spikeman's, you aren't muted yet.
We're working on it.
Good. All right.
All right. So you saw this image last week, and there you go. So you saw this image last week, and this is a picture of hospitality. And I explained to you that these were some folks that I had started out in a ministry. I thought I was doing ministry to them, but through some circumstances, I found out I was doing ministry with them. And then I found out that I was going to experience the ministry by them when they heard I was going to be in town, and they hosted me at a river house in Williamsburg, Virginia. And the whole house was filled up with these wonderful pictures. But how do you get there? How do you get from first thinking that it'd be good if you had a ministry to people with disabilities to having a ministry that's really run by people with disabilities, particularly intellectual and developmental disabilities? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to challenge some of our practices and some of our thought patterns. So I'm going to give you an image to look at for a moment. Here it comes. I've received this image from Kara Milne, who's written a nice, accessible little book on disability and accessible congregations. This was an actual photograph she took, or no, it was a photograph a parent took and they gave to her. It was their son who was involved in choir. This is an image that should evoke a lot of responses, a lot of feelings. This is inclusion without belonging. With this, you've fulfilled your ADA, Americans with Disability Act guidelines, in that the choir member was able to be in the same space, obviously was able to get in the building, obviously able to be in the room. But there's a problem that goes beyond accessibility here. And that has to do with what truly constitutes belonging. So the challenge then was there any other way to do this? Well, obviously there was. I mean, couldn't we have just shifted the choir over a little bit? Or couldn't we have allowed him to roll in front there? But for some reason, and if you can see his face, he's there just longing to be part of that group. And so the sad thing is, this is a church that could say we have an effective disability ministry because this individual's in the choir and this individual's part of our community, but this is inclusion without belonging. So we have to start thinking differently about how we create spaces, create programs. And as we move along, I'm going to give you some different terms to help you think through this in your own congregation. One more image here. I bet everybody's seen this icon. And when you see it, what comes to mind immediately is a parking space, probably. Some people have come up with a new icon, this one. And they believe that this one shows more agency and doesn't, in the first one, the person seems to be almost part of the chair or part of the wheel, and static and helpless. And another one, they seem to be moving forward. I showed this to some of my friends with disabilities, and actually I have a friend with cerebral palsy who says, well, I'm more the first one. I mean, that's me. I am dependent on other people. In fact, if we want to talk about making life a level playing field so people with disabilities can participate, I'm going to die. Because if life's a level playing field, I'm dead. I need someone to feed me. I need someone to care for me. So even these sorts of things don't really solve our problem. So what are we going to do? How are we going to get from where we think of a ministry to people with disabilities to ministry by people with disabilities? One of the things we have to do is we have to complexify our common sense. We have a common sense understanding of disability. We know when we see it, but we don't realize that we view disability the way we do because of the environment we live in. I mean, our lives are structured so that it's obvious who has a disability. They don't fit into what would be a normate or ableist bias, the way that, again, programs are created, the way that buildings are put together, the way our lives fit together. And people with disabilities have always faced this. So much so that Rosemary Garland Thompson, who's a leader in disability studies, says, look, you know what we are? We're expert life hackers. If you want to try to figure something out, a different perspective, invite someone with a disability, because all of our lives, we've had to live our lives in a world that's not created for us. So Rosemary Garland Thompson says, we are expert users, life hackers of situations into which we fit uneasily, transforming the work world with our presence and distinct expertise. So if we are thinking about disability ministry, and this is something I have my students do in my introduction to disability ministry class, I say, create a comic that talks about inclusion, a comic that talks about the experience of disability by people at church. And one person made an excellent comic, and I was scrolling through all my files trying to find it. Unfortunately, files on my computer are very much like the files on my desk. I mean, I'm glad they're there, but I can't find things in them very well. And so this one file is the artwork of people who've taken that class. And the one that struck me the most was a conference table and some people sitting around the conference table trying to figure out how they're going to put together this disability ministry, and then wheeling just outside the door, sort of peeking in, but not part of this conversation, was a person, a wheelchair user. So here there are these people saying, how are we going to make things more accessible for people with disabilities, and not taking into account the insights of the very people with disabilities. And those are the life hackers, the people who have learned to navigate a world that's not created for them. So I'm going to give you 3 words right now that are just sort of conceptual hangers for ways we can think about accessibility for our whole church: ramps, and social bridges. Ramps, and social bridges. And what we're going to talk about is, how do we create not just accessible spaces, but accessible environments, places where people's contributions really are welcome and their perspectives are valued. So we'll go one at a time with these and sort of fill them out a little deeper. So ramps is the first one, and ramps is the most obvious. I mean, so that space right there is inaccessible unless there's a ramp. I don't think I told you this story last time. Just seeing this reminded me of it. And if I told it last time, just go like this and I'll stop. But we hosted, the Western Theological Seminary hosted the Summer Institute on Theology and Disability. And one of the things that I wanted us to have happen is for the participants in that conference to see different ministries in the community and how they're doing this work. So we had a group go to Benjamin's Hope and see what's going on there, including the Church at Benjamin's Hope, which is a community where people on the autism spectrum live. We had them go to Donna Bunce's thing that I can't remember the name of. That's like a respite care kind of opportunity. Compassionate Heart. We had them go over there. And then we had them come to Renew Therapeutic Riding, which is across the street from my house. Now it's on this huge property, but it used to be across the street from our house. We live on 60th Street in Holland, Michigan. And so they went to see this, and then afterwards we were going to have them come eat at our home. But our home, our home is pretty wide open spaces that's wheelchair accessible. Even the bathrooms are wheelchair accessible. But the house itself, I had to take apart one of the ramps from Renew and make a ramp inside the house. And it was a big, heavy metal piece like that. And I had sort of a strong guy from the seminary help me do it. And we got everyone in the house and had a wonderful meal. And then I thought, oh, this strong guy's leaving, so I need someone to help me put the ramp back. So I had him help me put the ramp back, but it was before the event ended. So we had 3 power chairs and one just chair like that inside the house with no ramp to get out. So problems with accessibility. That is what is called a retrofit. And a retrofit, while it's beneficial in saying you can be a part of things, a retrofit says this space was not designed with you in mind. And some retrofits can even be obnoxious, like ramps that go back and forth so many times that just say, clearly this space was not made for you. But ramps include ramps that get you into buildings, but I already mentioned some other things: wider doorways, wider pathways, different height water fountains, buttons that you can push to get in a room. All these things I'd put under the category of ramp. A hearing loop I would put in the category of ramp. It's something that makes the space more accessible. A hearing loop is a wire that goes around a particular room that allows people with hearing aids that can connect to that to hear through amplified through their hearing aid. So that's a ramp. And so we're all familiar with ramps. American with Disabilities Act is all about ramps. And you can legislate ramps. I mean, you can have someone go through with a measuring stick and say, have you done this properly? But you can't legislate attitudes. And that's where the next one comes in. That's a social ramp. So social ramp, this idea of a social ramp represents any accommodation made by a church to make the social environment more accessible to people with disabilities, particularly intellectual and developmental disabilities, but sometimes just like it's a social ramp. When a social ramp is created, when someone comes to church in a wheelchair, then people won't talk to the person pushing the person in the wheelchair. When a social ramp is in place, when someone who's blind comes to church, then people won't grab them by the arm and lead them, like I did one time accidentally. So all these sorts of social ramps are a way of preparing the environment to receive the people that'll come because the ramps are in place. Because the accessibility is in place, these folks now can be a part of your community. The social ramps make sure that you're ready to receive them. And how do you start building social ramps? Well, then you have to become more attuned to what the needs are. And the way that you do that is by having your church build social bridges. So the concept of social bridges acknowledges the fact that the church needs to be immersed in the community where people with disabilities live, work, play, and struggle. The relationships built in these contexts will provide bridges between the disability community and the community of a particular congregation. So how are we going to know what social ramps we need to have ready? Well, you have to spend time around people with various disabilities. And so my encouragement to any church is, before you think about how can we set up a program here for people with disabilities, is to spend time helping out with Special Olympics, with buddy sports, with therapeutic writing, volunteering at Benjamin's Hope, volunteering at Renewed Therapeutic Writing, all these sorts of places where you can get to know people with disabilities and their families and learn how to interact. I mean, there's a learning curve there. The first step is learning to be comfortable being uncomfortable. So to help us think through these things, again, that's ramps, social ramps, and social bridges. I have some more concepts. The first is universal design. And we're going to talk more about it in terms of universal social design. And we'll do some case studies. But universal social design requires preparing a social environment, educating this social environment, and coaching it. And I'll give a couple examples where I work all those out and tell you places I failed. But hopefully to point to, you're always going to fail. I mean, part of learning is failing. I love to lift weights, and failure is the absolute goal in weightlifting. So we will talk about that. But I'll give you some quick examples of that. Attending to stimuli for people with sensory integration issues. I know I talked about my son, but one funny experience with my son that wasn't funny at the time. My whole family, the 4 kids who were all under 6 years old, with one of them being very, very young. And my wife and I were all at Princeton Seminary. I was doing my doctoral work. We had just moved there. We had just gotten this diagnosis for Tommy. Every bedtime was challenging because all the girls were in the same bedroom and just messed with each other. And then Tommy, we were just learning how to interact with Tommy, who was missing a third of his brain and had a lot of markers of being on the autism spectrum. And I was trying to get him to go to bed. I always put him to bed and let my wife fight with the girls. And then we'd trade if one of us was crying. And so I'd put Tommy to bed, and this particular night, he was having a hard time focusing as we were having a conversation. And so I tapped him on the side of the face just to make him look at me. And he screamed. And he said, "Ow, Dad, you hit me." And we're in apartments with people above us, people beside us. And so I, being very sensitive, I said, "No, I didn't hit you. Nobody hit you," making sure everybody hears. But then, I did think, okay, Tommy, touch me the way you think I just touched you. And he hauled off and smacked me, and my glasses flew off. And I thought, wow, what's going on here? And then we had a light that flickered a little bit. Well, he just, that did it for him. One time we cooked Brussels sprouts, and the smell of the Brussels sprouts, You cannot like the smell of Brussels sprouts, but if Tommy smells them, he falls on the ground and he's moving. Oh my gosh, what is that? That's the worst thing. He had sensory integration issues. Are we aware of these fragrances, sights, and sounds that sometimes can be really important in our faith, but also can be challenging for some people in terms of participation? Do we make concepts comprehensible? Do we make differences normal by acknowledging them from up front? Do we teach a congregation how to engage people with specific disabilities? Like the thing I mentioned, if there's a wheelchair user, to not say someone's wheelchair bound, because they think of themselves as having something that helps them move from here to there. I'm not bound, I'm a user, I use this wheelchair. We don't say somebody's car bound if they try to drive from Holland to Grand Rapids. We just say they've used a car. I mean, it's just a mode of moving. And then do we talk to the person in the wheelchair or the person that's pushing them? Or when we talk to somebody with Down syndrome, do we all of a sudden speak like we're talking to a second grader or a third grader? Or if we're leading a worship time, do we suddenly go to little kids songs? I mean, all these sorts of things are ways that we prepare a congregation to engage people with disabilities. And then offering buddies to help people with intellectual and developmental disabilities be more included. So there's just some examples of real specific things you can start to do. Universal design focuses on considering the needs of diverse people at the start of the design process, whether that designs a curriculum or a building, and you eliminate as many barriers as possible. Responsive design is overcoming barriers at an individual level through whatever, sometimes assistive technologies, but so universal design is thinking ahead of time. How can I create this so as many people as possible can participate without having to make exceptional modifications, right? And then the other one, responsive design, says, I've designed something, here's a problem, I have to address it. You're always going to have to do those, but the better your universal design is, the less you're going to have to make these other modifications. And what the best place to see this is on playgrounds. There's a playground in Williamsburg, Virginia called MySpace, and it was created with people with physical and intellectual disabilities in mind. And how can we make this playground as accessible so that kids without disabilities and kids with disabilities can share the same equipment without having to have someone present? I went past MySpace my place. I went past it a few times and didn't see anyone there, because one of the problems is you still have to get to the place, right? You still have to be able to get there. But then I did start noticing more people taking advantage of it. And here are the kind of things I noticed. From principles of universal design, everything was equally accessible. So here you have, I don't know, I forget what you call these spinny things. I just remember I used to get thrown off them. But you have one space where you can go forward and lock your wheelchair in, and two others where you have seats, and then another where someone can just stand, or a couple people can just stand. So it's equally accessible to all. You avoid stigmatizing and segregating users. You avoid separate entrances for people in wheelchairs. You allow people freedom to sit where they want if they're hearing impaired. Regardless of body size, regardless of skills, you make it more approachable for use. You do this in physical spaces, you do this in learning spaces as well. The next idea from universal design that I saw at this playground was that all the things there were simple and intuitive. They accommodated a variety of literacy competencies. They're not unnecessarily complex. So this little part right here, anybody could figure that out. I mean, she figured it out easily. And you know, it's a way for her to get her heart rate up as someone who can't use her legs. So if you've ever done heavy battle ropes or something like this before, you know you can get just as tired. But it's simple and intuitive. One of the most important things I noticed at this playground is that there was high tolerance for error. It had this nice spongy surface, so if someone fell, they wouldn't get injured. And many people who are at this playground are likely candidates for a fall. But if you have these fail-safe features, it minimizes hazards of negative consequences and gives people confidence to try out things that they might not otherwise try out. So this rubberized surface on the playground is really helpful. And another thing I noticed is that people were playing with things in many different ways. And that concept from universal design is flexibility in use. It can be adaptable to the user's pace or the user's methods of using something or the user's abilities. So this was a little climbing area, but it had so many things you could hold on to: ropes, little rock things. The slope wasn't too challenging, and it was forgiving if you didn't make it. But the most creative thing I saw had to do with low effort for users, because this little gentleman using this particular station or play set item has some capabilities, pretty strong to work his way through this. But what if he couldn't exert this kind of effort? Well, here's a set of monkey bars that you can do all kind of things with. You can climb on top, you can hold your feet up, but here are wheelchair users able to use these monkey bars. It's low effort for users, so it can be used efficiently and comfortably without fatigue. And if you want to talk about social ramps, then you're talking about how do you minimize social effort. So what we're doing with social ramps is taking these sort of ramps that fit with universal design and learning, and we're saying, okay, we can do this with the physical environment. How do we do this with the social environment? So I'm skipping that one, going to this one. If you're thinking about universal design principles in a worship area, you can ask, who does it help? And so if you have barrier-free access for spaces, all spaces in a church, who does it help? I mean, it helps a wheelchair user. It helps someone who's older with a walker. It helps someone who's sprained their ankle playing basketball. It helps a parent who's pushing someone in a stroller. If you have press button automatic doors, if it's a large button that's easy to get with an elbow or a knee, it helps somebody who's holding something. It helps a wheelchair user. It helps, again, someone pushing a stroller, someone pushing a wheelchair, someone carrying a bunch of hymnals. You make the buttons as wide as you can with an easy target to touch. So it makes it simple, intuitive. You can use it with many different parts of your body, even bump your hip into it. Variety of height for the water fountain, helps smaller children, taller people. It doesn't stigmatize. It helps people with wheelchairs, flexible seating options, help introverts, extroverts, people who want to sit beside friends who are wheelchair users. So anyways, all this is there in universal design. The point is it's created for as many people to use as possible. And that's talking about the physical space. But let's talk more about the kinds of things we do when we're together. And that's where you talk about universal design for learning, and you talk about preparing spaces. So 3 principles from universal design and learning are: first, multiple means or flexibility in representation or the ways we teach. So many modes in your presentations, oral information with captions, digital text that can be manipulated. You can use those little codes you can scan with your phone. I can't remember what they're called, QV codes, QR codes. And then all of a sudden you have that document on your phone. And if you have challenges with vision, you can get it so you can manipulate it with a whatever screen reader you have. So you do multiple means and have flexibility and representation, or the ways we teach in all areas of our church, from the sermon to the Sunday school to the youth group to whatever. And then flexible means and expression, that is people learn different ways, give them different ways to demonstrate that they've learned. So pen and paper can be difficult for those with fine motor skills. My son was terrible. He couldn't write at all. So what did we do with him? Every time I had a test or quiz with him, it was oral. We did a lot of oral presentations. He had a hard time with vision tracking. So he would, when I was teaching him, he would listen to things on tape. Now there's Audible and all kind of other means. Challenge learners to grow in areas where they aren't strong, but give them a chance to do what they're good at. In my classes I teach at Western, I always have opportunities for artistic responses. People who aren't particularly good at writing an essay and putting together an essay sometimes are really good at spatial ways or artistic ways or musical ways of demonstrating that they understand what I've taught in a way that enriches the whole class and deepens our understanding of the subject matter. And this is true whether I've taught at the seminary or whether I've taught a Bible study with people with intellectual disabilities. And finally, multiple means of engagement, which is tapping into people's motivations and interests. Learners have differences in developmental experience, abilities, motivation. So have a flexible teaching opportunities where there's learner choice and control in a way that promotes engagement and have a distributed sort of intelligence there. So let me take this and be even more specific. So these are the concepts and ideas. So how does it play? So this is a beautiful camp in Virginia, Rock Ridge. It's near Lexington, surrounded by the Georgia National Washington Forest. In fact, that pool there, if you look in between the two buildings, that's where the hot tub is, and that's where I found my friend Bo naked after I had lost and thought I had lost him in the George Washington National Forest. Not my best moment. But one thing that happened at this camp is the camp sort of speaker, the person who is the one who is responsible for putting together a series of messages, and it was taking us through this sort of the life and work of Jesus. And the story that this speaker told on one particular night was about Peter walking on the water, and Jesus walking on the water, and Peter walking out to Jesus. And it just occurred to me, why did we come out of this area where you have this wonderful lake and pool and get everyone into a room that was the club room that's just like a large sort of meeting room with a stage, and explain this just using words when you have a whole bunch of people who words aren't their primary mode for understanding. It was a camp filled with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I wonder, in terms of representation, how the information is presented to people and having multiple means, not just multiple intelligences, but wouldn't it have been much more effective to say, does anyone want to try to walk on the water? And then they'd go in the water. There was nothing magic about once you're inside this room that things work better. Why not take advantage of all the things that were around you to communicate? If you want to help someone to understand it, then they can actually try to walk on the water and see how that works for them, right? So invite people to explore more deeply. So this is just one case study, one situation where they hadn't really thought through the environment and what the environment had to offer and how they were using it relative to the people they had there. So here's a case study. Megan's phone in church. We always tried to get Megan, who lives at the Friendship House. Well, actually, we hadn't really tried, but Megan started just coming to church with us. We went to a church downtown Holland that was in walking distance from where she lived in Friendship House. Megan is not terribly verbal. She repeats words over and over again to make sure you understand them. But she's very engaged. And when she's at church with us, her favorite part is my least favorite part, the passing of the peace. That's when I try to hide somewhere or I decide I need to tie my shoes 3 or 4 times. She loves the passing of the peace, loves connecting with people. She sings, but doesn't necessarily sing the words. She intones things. Same thing with the Lord's Prayer. Same thing with the Creed. I mean, she intones them. She decided when we were out of town one time to go to church all by herself, which is great. And she sat where we usually sat, next to the people we usually hang out with. But her phone started ringing and she didn't really understand her phone very well. And so she tried to turn off but couldn't. And people looked at her. Somebody actually shushed her. No one helped her. Then she started crying and no one comforted her or noticed. And then she just ran home. Okay. How do we prepare the social environment? How do we use universal design and learning principles? Or how do we use these things we're learning? So how could we have prepared the environment differently? Well, if we knew Megan was going, we could have made sure there was someone there to meet Megan so that she wasn't alone. That would have been a simple way to prepare the environment. To educate, how could we have educated it? Well, she had been going to church with us for months, and I guess we hadn't done a very good job at explaining to the people around us how to engage Megan. Megan was there just with us, but we weren't doing much to integrate her into the congregation. So I think we could educate the people who sit near us about how do you interact with Megan? What do you do when this happens? And what does it mean when she does this? And had we been in the situation, we could have coached it. We weren't there, so we didn't have the opportunity to coach the environment. But exclusion was occurring at a place that purports to be inclusive. And why is that? What could we do about it? Jeff McNair gives us a little help. Jeff McNair works with Johnny and Friends International and teaches at Cal Baptist in California. He said, if exclusion occurs because of social skill deficits, who has the deficits? Is the one who should change the person who does not understand social rules, or the person who wields adherence to them as a weapon of exclusion? If we're going to start having Megans in our churches, then we need to have congregations that are ready to receive Megans in ways that make Megans feel like she has a contribution to make and she's a valued member, not like she was a nuisance, inconvenience. Jeff McNair asks how the commands of God relate to the traditions of people when it comes to changing churches to be more inclusive. And he believes the commands of God should override the traditions of people so that we can make everything more accessible and comprehensible and welcoming. Case study number 2, Connor in a busy room. Connor, I might have mentioned this, my friend on the autism spectrum. If there's a room, he's not going to want to be in the middle of it because there are way too many things to stimulate him. He's going to be on the outside. But one time, one of my new volunteer leaders thought that unless Connor was right in the middle of all the activity, Connor wasn't being included. So she didn't think about how Connor might feel about this. She was just thinking of what's the typical way that somebody expresses inclusion or participates in an activity. But you need to think through a non-normative lens for Connor. So how do we prepare? The way I always prepared the room for Connor is have many spaces he could be in without being in the center, still feeling like it's a space that's prepared for him. There's a chair over here, there's a beanbag over here, but it's not right next to the sounds, smells, and movements. I needed to educate that volunteer a little better prior to that experience to say, look, when Connor's in the doorway, Connor's present, the way that Connor's comfortable being present. He might have had too many things that are stimulating him. And then when he's in a chair on the edge of the group, and then even sometimes he chooses to go where people are, but we need to let that up to him. The concepts we were covering were made accessible to him, but the space wasn't necessarily accessible to him. And then coaching, well, I did coach at that moment. I did explain to that volunteer that it's okay that Connor's there because Connor is participating and does feel connected. And if you'd like, you could sit there with Connor. Case study number 3, Chris and the narthex. So Chris, a friend, a wheelchair user, cerebral palsy, speaks through a speech device, difficult to understand him if he's not using that. Goes to in the narthex of a church, has people coming up and not talking to him, talking to the person who's beside him. When they do look at him or talk to him, they stay standing up, so he has to crane his neck to look at them, and they use sort of child language, sort of a child speak. How do you prepare? How do you educate? How do you coach? Well, unless you have a congregation that's prepared to receive Chris as he is, don't invite him to be part of things, because he's going to face the same kind of exclusion and painful engagement that he faces. So you do need to educate a congregation. If you think you're going to have a ministry and that's going to include people with disabilities in various roles and places in your church, the congregation has to be ready. So I encourage one church I was consulting with to start a ministry that's not to people with disabilities, but is to your congregation, to have them think differently about disabilities. And if you do that, then you will have started a disability ministry. Well, how are we going to be comfortable being around disabilities? We don't know people with disabilities. Well, first of all, you do. I mean, 20% of people have some sort of disabilities, yet 40% of families are touched by someone with a disabilities in terms of friends or family member. But what you have to do is get used to being around disabilities. And that is that last concept of social bridges. So we've looked at ramps, and we looked at universal design. We looked at social ramps, and we looked at universal design and learning. We did some case studies, and now we're looking at social bridges. And just as one example, therapeutic writing. What does it do as a social bridge? Well, it's a chance to work with people who are experiencing trust. They have to trust the horse. They have to trust their sidewalkers. They have to trust the horse leader. So if you want to build a relationship of trust with a family or with people with disabilities, serve as a volunteer in therapeutic writing. It's opportunities that many people with disabilities don't have, to compete in sport, to be someone that others are jealous of. You get to ride horses, to be seen in a new light. You're not seen as a person with a disability. You're seen as an athlete or a rider. And it's an opportunity. It's a shared experience that you get to have. It's a shared experience outside the walls of the church that will change the dynamics of life inside the church, that forms a deeper connection. So there's a deep connection formed between the volunteers and the riders, deep connection formed between the horses and the riders. How can this work and form a church? Many ways. Experience outside the church, strengthen the environment and community within a church, create an environment of universal design. Friendships are built on trust, so friendships develop through these shared experiences. The shared experience of adventure deepens these relationships. Social role valorization talks about the roles that people have and how we quickly target them. You see someone wearing a white smock, you figure they're a doctor. You see someone in a wheelchair, you have assumptions about them. And you have a value statement. For example, a plumber is not a valued social role until you have your pipes leaking or your toilet continuing to flush or something like that. Then all of a sudden it's a very valued social role. But we know what valued social roles are. And when you ask somebody, one of the first things we say is, what do you do? Where do you work? And we make quick connections. People with disabilities don't have often as many different roles in the community, and the roles they do have are not necessarily valued social roles. But a rider's a rider, an athlete's an athlete, and that's a valued social role. So more diverse teams benefit from one another experiences. You learn that there's not just one way to teach something, but you think about learning styles. The visual, auditory, kinesthetic are all important, particularly in churches where we can be talked to death. And then activity that involves our entire being enhances and learns trust. and these relationships make worship in the community more meaningful. So that's I just use one specific example that I'm very familiar with. There are many other ways you can do it, but if you volunteered at therapeutic writing space, that could change the dynamics inside a church, how you welcome people, how you create physical spaces, how you create relational social spaces. So last 3 words to keep in mind. So we've done, remember, we've done ramps, social bridges. We talked about universal design and learning. So here are 3 more words: presence, intention, and dimension. Keep these before you at your church. Presence, that until you are in the presence of people with disabilities, don't even imagine a disability ministry, because you don't have the insights, experiences, relationships. Yeah, presence of people with disabilities on all levels of what you're doing is absolutely important. Intention, you have to have intentional times of training for your congregation, for your staff, and for your leadership, for your deacons, for your elders, for your youth group leaders, for your volunteers, for your whole congregation. There have to be intentional points that you're offering opportunities for people with disabilities to be engaged if it's not fitting into your universal design you've set up. And that leads to the last one. Once you're doing this, then the experience of disability becomes a dimension of everything you're doing as a church. It informs the way that you pray together, that you worship together. It gives you particular insights when you interpret scripture. It makes you focus more on the fact that you're embodied creatures called to worship God with everything that you have. So that's what I got for you. And then I can open up to any questions or comments.
So I'll unmute everybody. Well, no, you've got to unmute yourself if you have a question. So Rachel, you can hear me, right? All right. So one of the things that you and I had a conversation following last week's presentation was an idea you had in terms of some of the shared experience. And it comes out of your experience at Cran Hill in terms of asking for volunteers for a special week. Take a minute, put in a commercial for that.
Yeah, so if you aren't aware of how Stephen and I kind of got involved into special needs ministry, was through Cran Hill when we were counselors. And Cran Hill does, it kind of depends on the year, but 3 to 4 weeks of friendship camp. So it's adults with disabilities of pretty much any kind, because we have some that are like walker users, there's intellectual disabilities, kind of like a whole range of people. But the key being, I think they have to be at least 16. Is that right? Yeah, so 16 is the youngest, and then there's no age gap up top. So wide range of abilities and ages, and it's super fun. But that's where we started kind of learning about all that. And I remember like my first week being the most intimidating thing of my life, but now we go back every summer to volunteer for it because we love it so much. So yeah, we had just said how like that would be a really good immersive experience for people. And I should say Jesse has done this too. So I don't want to exclude Jesse there now that I'm looking at him. But it's 5 days, 4 nights of just like immersed into this like different culture where you like really, you learn real quick, like just how to be part of a different community. And it's so fun. And like when we talked about last week, the whole fruits of the spirit stuff, like I was already listing off people who attended camp. I was like, oh, that camper like definitely taught me patience, and that one taught me love. And so yeah, it's just like the most amazing week, and you're gonna learn a lot too. So we were kind of talking about like how Stephen's a chaplain for one of the weeks every summer now, how it'd be fun to bring some TCC people with us to kind of do more of a church thing, I guess. Cool. Yeah. Is that what we talked about, Tim? Is that what you're thinking?
Yep. Thanks, Rachel.
That's a great kind of experience to do. Camp Sunshine has a week too. I don't know how they raise so much money for just 1 week, but they do. But it is the kind of thing where you do something like that, and the people who come as volunteers or who are interested, then they are looking for that even more, you know, and what those sorts of one-off things need is the rest of the year. I mean, what happens the rest of the year for folks with disabilities? They're looking for these sorts of opportunities. And so I think churches are really poised to step into that space.
You know, we have the Whitney House that we've been working with now. We'll celebrate our 10-year anniversary this year. You may not know that Shelley Abbott was a key person in that. And Shelley came along and you know, when we first started, we did the birthday parties, we did some special events and things. Shelley started going to play cards or go on walks every Wednesday night. What you probably don't know is that Shelley Abbott also coached a basketball team then. And so Doug Honholt and I would be among the fans at the basketball games from time to time. I think Pastor Kent's gone to see our Dwayne play, or Stanley, depending on, and there's a whole series of things. But I just think about how, you know, listening to Ben's presentation this morning, I think we have to continue to just remind ourselves we are going to fail from time to time and not do it as well as we could, and that's okay. But it's immersing yourself into opportunities that allow your comfort to grow, allow the relationship and trust to grow. It's just so important. Kent, I'm wondering if you would want to comment as a pastor of what it's been like to incorporate the various needs of Adele, of Stanley when he was here, and any of those stories that might be your own case study.
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, with the guys from the Whitney House, right? Those were we had understanding of them coming in as a group that we as a church were connecting with, and that certainly precedes me. So I kind of came in when that was already happening here in sort of wonderful ways. And then Dale comes riding in, right? Where Dale's simply a member of the neighborhood. He's not connected to a group that we're attempting to do ministry with, like with the Whitney House. And so, but one thing that Ben was talking about when it comes to presence, I think Ben said something to the effect of, don't even think about doing a ministry with people with disabilities until they're in your presence already. And I think, like, for Dale, like, TCC was so able to receive him and to allow him to be a integral part of our community because of the work that had already happened here for years with the guys from Whitney. It's almost like they laid out the red carpet for Dale, and others who hopefully by God's grace will follow in his steps, right, into this place in future years. So that really, from a case study perspective, I think TCC has already kind of done that, and done that well, because Dale, he can't wait to get back here. That's where I went after he was actually out in the parking lot just a second ago. I saw him come in as the kids were doing their Zoom thing, and he can't wait to get back here. And I think that's a testimony to the love that he has received here, because we were ready for him because of the guys from Whitney.
Thanks. Other questions for Ben? Brenda, go ahead. Unmute.
My question is if you have any past experience or models to share with us regarding middle school and high school. I'm on our youth ministry team, and I think of sometimes training the kids for somebody with different needs who might be coming along, and the appropriate way to prepare them, the way sometimes classrooms are prepared by a counselor when a new student with some very different needs would be coming in. But then also working with the parents, the family, to say, how can we best serve your young person, I'm thinking particularly middle school, high school, not that it couldn't be for, a K through 5 student too, but just any words of wisdom or past specific examples?
Yeah, so there's one book on that out actually, and it's called Amplifying Our Witness, and I wrote it actually. So there's only one book on that, on youth ministry and intellectual and developmental disabilities and making it a welcoming space. And so I talk about that in that book, and the things you just talked about are the kinds of things that I talk about in there, but I go in more detail. But one of the big things is training your who you think of as your student leaders, and encouraging them. So what I did with my student leaders, I said, look, we're going to have Connor's going to come when Connor's here. If this is the only time Connor sees you, then Connor's going to have to just get used to it again each time. So how about this week you go take Connor to putt putt, or find out what Connor likes to do and go do something with Connor. And then next time Connor comes, then Connor might move from the doorway to the beanbag or something like that. But a lot of what happens inside that group that we spend so much time planning and so much energy for, thinking if we have the lesson right, then we have it right, is really secondary to all the stuff that happens outside of that. Preparing that environment requires spending time with people outside of that particular meeting time. And then you can do almost anything you want in the meeting time. So most of my time leading this ministry I was doing for 7 years was spent training people how to be around people with disabilities and how to be around specific people. Yeah.
I have ordered your book, Amplifying Our Witness, and I'm looking forward to reading it, but have not yet received it. I have a copy of another book, Disabling Mission Enabling Witness, and I did make it through that, although I have to tell you, I felt less than fully able at times because I felt that it was pretty deep, challenging conceptual matter for me.
Well, the other one,
there's a lot of education that has to take place for me here. My life has been mired firmly in the ableist realm. My education was not with people who were disabled. My vocation, my time on the job is not spent with people who are disabled mentally or in significant physical ways. So I've got to step into this. I've got to learn about it, and then I've got to get some boots on the ground exposure to move forward here. And so obviously with the pandemic, the latter has been difficult, if not impossible, but it's going to be a ongoing learning and then getting some experience to participate in this. But that's what's exciting, because this is all new for me.
That's great. And so here's a suggestion: while you can't be with people in person, one thing that you can do is start watching things and reading things that put your antenna up. And so there's a documentary called Crip Camp. It's a little base at times, but it gives you a sense of the disability rights movement, how it came about, and how many of these folks who are early advocates think of themselves. Another book, Peanut Butter Falcon, is a movie that stars someone with an intellectual disability who's not seen in a paternalistic way, but is actually a movie star who's participating in this movie. Books you could read, there's one called The Reason I Jump. The Reason I Jump is co-written by a young Japanese boy and a friend of his who's not he's on the autism spectrum. He was thought to be nonverbal, non-communicative. Someone learned how to communicate with him, and he wrote a book. And the title, The Reason I Jump, explains, here's why I jump. People ask, why do you jump? Here's why I jump. And it's just his thoughts on a variety of things as a young person on the autism spectrum who was thought to be, non-communicative. And then one more for autism, Look Me in the Eye, written by John Elder Robison, Robison, Look Me in the Eye, My Life with Autism. It's pretty funny. I mean, he ended up creating the first speaking toys for Mattel. He made the flaming guitars for Kiss. He refined Pink Floyd's sound a little bit because he could see sound. He could see sound, and so he had a particular way of organizing it. But at the same time, he had these challenges growing up. He would play with a kid who's playing with a dump truck, and they're playing with the dump truck as something else because they're a kid. And he realizes that person is playing with it wrong because it's a dump truck and it's supposed to be played with this way. So he'd explain it to the kid, and the kid didn't appreciate the fact that he was telling him how you're properly supposed to play with a dump truck. So of course he had to discipline this person so he'd play with it properly. Another story, he was carrying, he and his mother were guests at somebody's house, and he was carrying the tea in, and a cup fell off. And they said, "Oh, that's just great." So then he threw the rest down, because if that was great, then I want to be really great, because he doesn't understand that kind of sarcasm or that kind of humor. And so he talks about all these challenges in his life. But the point is, by reading these things, it starts to get you the first person accounts. What's it like? What's your experience like? And it makes us more attuned, so we can relate to people better in ways that will be helpful to them. In fact, the whole section of my Intro to Disability in our church course is interviews I do with people with disabilities about their experience of the church. And it's called In Our Own Voices. And so I interview a blind gentleman, someone on the autism spectrum, wheelchair users, spinal muscular atrophy, someone who'd been in an accident, so they had an onset disability that they didn't have all their life, So I think that's one of the most important things, and that connects to that presence aspect.
Well, our time has come that we need to say goodbye to Ben, and know that we had a quick exchange this weekend. I know that some of you have emailed him. Feel free to do that in the future. We have some other ideas. Ben, thanks so much for spending 2 weeks with us, and know that we have our next week. Watch what comes out this week in case we are pushed to go to 2 services. Our meeting time will be slightly later than what it's been. I think we're going to be fine with 1 service. But if not, we'll have an 8:45, a 10 o'clock, and Sunday school will start somewhere right around 11 o'clock next week. So just be attuned to that. We're doing our best to be flexible and live into the here and now. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord, everybody. Take care. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks for having me.